Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's just great that you guys are putting this together. Just want to say thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure. And I guess we don't have a lot of time. It's just 1 hour. So we can take questions about any of the past work, but I thought today I'll just create something new in this 1 hour. And since Dominic already showed us a lot of modeling stuff of some awesome tools, the ZBrush tools, I'm gonna probably take from that and actually start this sketch before I came here so we can just maybe skip a little bit the modeling part and just talk more about the refining and texturing and see if we have time to do some rendering inside of ZBrush. Take it to Photoshop, work with those layers and yeah, get it from where Dominic stopped. So basically on this, again, if you guys have questions about my past work, just feel free to ask, and I'll be happy to answer. So just like most of my personal work and a lot of professional too, I just started this from a Dynamesh sphere, just like Dominic did. And by using Dynamesh, you can push and pull and create different shapes. So I started with a very low resolution with the Dynamesh, and right now it's still pretty low, but I try to go just keep up-resing as I get happy with the overall shape. So yeah, right now you can see it's not very dense, and I'm just gonna keep working on this since we don't have a lot of time, and I wanna get something fairly good for you guys. So before I start, I just wanna go through my UI and my hotkeys real quick. You can see here I have all my base materials and some main lighting around there that I can easily just change the light position. Especially when I'm working with faces, it's very good to keep changing that light and see if everything is working. I also have the ZAppLink custom views right here that I can store. If I think this is gonna be kind of my final image, I can easily go here and store a view. And I can always go back if I'm working and then I want to see how that's looking. I can go back since I have my views right there. I can store a morph target. I also have some of the brushes that I use right there, but my main brushes they're all my hotkeys and a keyboard. So you can see I'm gonna quickly switch between brushes without going in any of the UI. So I have clay, I have move, inflate, standard brush, damn standard. So by having everything in here on my 4 fingers, I can easily just keep working without worrying about the interface. And you can see I'm really using those brushes that I just mentioned. I'm just gonna go in there and start refining. So instead of actually doing a Z-remesher and then projection like Dominic did, on this one, since it's just gonna be a still, I'm not gonna pose the character or anything, I'm just gonna start subdividing. And Dynamesh, if you're working with a low resolution, it should be pretty good to keep working without Z-remeshing. So I'm just gonna start playing with this guy and adding some of the shapes. And again, I'm using damn standard. I'm just changing the brush without going to the interface. Just adding that eye bag in there. So I'm just gonna start refining this. Again, we don't have a lot of time. Usually I spend quite some time at this stage just refining those shapes, adding the secondary detail. Again, a lot of people ask me if I use the clay brush or if I use the clay tubes or clay buildup, and it really depends on what I'm trying to do. Usually for a more final stage, when I'm just refining, the clay works really well because it's very soft and the alpha is very soft. But when I'm just blocking out some of the details and folds and stuff like that, the clay tubes really works because when I go back there and start smoothing everything, I'm gonna have that secondary detail that I'm actually not thinking about it, but it's just gonna be there because the clay creates these very hard edges. So stuff like this, like very subtle, but the clay tubes really help to bring this stuff to life. And again, I'm working with a very low resolution right now. I don't go straight to the 5 subdivision or very dense mesh. You can do pretty much everything with just enough topology.
You ready for a question?
Sure. Anytime.
Look at that. We already one here on the floor. Let me get the Twitter one first, and then I'll get the one on the floor. So Nick Zuccarella is asking, I know you won the Form 1 this past year at the 3D Printer World Expo. How are you personally printing projects going, and what are your thoughts about the 3D printing world?
No, I think for me, I've been working with printing stuff with OnAge and some other companies from like a long time. So it wasn't something really new for me. It's just the process of making it myself. It's just a lot more work than it used to be. But I really enjoyed the printer is great. It's very easy to use. I had a great time with it. I have no complaints at all. I know it's still in the beginning, but it works really well. I'm happy with it.
Right,
again, just one more thing. Like this, the technology is just starting. We're just starting to get those portable printers. So I guess we just get better through those years.
Hey, here's a question from the floor.
So at what point do you decide to drop out of Dynamesh and start just going into subdivision levels to get your detail?
Just when I'm happy with the overall design. Like if nothing, if the silhouette's it's not going to change, the main shapes are not going to change, I just start subdividing and I stop using Dynamesh because I like to have my first subdivision still in a low density. I don't go too high with the Dynamesh because I still wanted to go back. Maybe sometimes I want to smooth everything and the topology is dense. It's not going to work the way I want it to be. So I just try to have a low resolution with the Dynamesh, and when I'm happy with the overall proportions and the overall shapes, I start subdividing. And
what division are you at right now?
say again?
What division are you at right now?
It's just just one subdivision, and it's, how much is that? 2 million, 2.6. So you guys can see here, I'm just using basically standard clay tubes and dense standard, and I'm really going in there and adding the break up to the folds and stuff, and trying to get those secondary details in, even getting like a small fold. And you can see it's very messy right now, but when I go back there and start smoothing and refining it more, every time I do that, I keep adding that secondary detail to it, and it gets more natural and more believable. So I'm just going nuts and just without thinking too much about it, I'm just adding a lot of stuff to it. And again, I don't want to go crazy. You still wanted to have that balance between tight skin and folds and wrinkles. So I'm not adding crazy amount of detail everywhere. I'm just trying to still reminding about the anatomy and trying to find those main landmarks of the human face and trying to apply that to our alien or creature. So you got the nasolabial fold right here. I'm still doing the eye bag and the brows, and the nose. I'm still trying to maintain some of the human aspect to it. I'm gonna go to the teeth.
Got some more Twitter questions if you want them.
Go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Taja Baba is asking, which brushes do you recommend the most for human and monster design?
Clay tubes. It's pretty much what we're doing right here. And yeah, just those 2 brushes to get the overall shape. And I think what's important about a creature design or human design is just the overall concept and design. It's not too much about the detail. So just by using those shapes, you can do whatever. in my 8 years of doing this, I pretty much use those brushes.
All right, here's another one for you. Oh, where'd it go? So Jesse Velasquez is asking, how do you decide what to break up into subtools when you're creating your pieces?
Yeah, that really depends on the project and what I'm gonna do with it. For example, on the Raptor piece, I had a lot of different subtools for the body, and that was because just the amount of detail that I wanted to put in, and just being more flexible to work with. I try to find those seams that nobody's gonna notice, and I break up as much as I can, and then I can still use Transpose Master and the ZBrush plugins to pose it or move it if I wanted to. But yeah, it depends on the project. Like different materials, or like the eyes, for example, it's a different subtool just for the fact that I want to apply different material to it. I'll probably split the mouth part from this character if it was for like if we had more time, but yeah, right now it depends.
Okay, here's one from the floor here.
I was wondering, do you start off with a concept in mind, or is it just something that flows when you're sculpting?
Can you repeat the question? If I started with a concept in Maya?
Yeah, do you have a concept in mind already, or do you just kind of, like, does it just flow like while you're sculpting?
You mean for this, or
Yeah,
for?
or just any time you sculpt. I guess when you do creature design.
If I have like a base mesh in Maya, is that
No, like a concept in mind already, like that you know what you're going to put down.
I don't.
Do you already have a concept before you even start
Oh, I
sculpting, or do you just jump in ZBrush and start using ZBrush in essence? And
No,
keep
usually
going?
I have a concept in mind, and yeah, pretty much every time I have something. If I want to just sketch something like this, even this, I have an idea of what I wanted to do, but not a specific concept. But most of my personal projects, I have a concept from a different artist. And I do that, and I've always done that, because if you want to work in a game company, or like most of the game studios, you're probably gonna sculpt concepts from other artists. So that's a very important skill to have, to be able to translate a concept art from a different artist. So I still have my own personal projects because I like to create something unique and something that it's mine. But if it's something for my professional portfolio or my professional goals, I usually go with a concept from a different artist and try to do that. That makes sense.
Here's a question from Twitter, which I'm assuming you're probably going to go get into, from Flacco. Would you recommend some wrinkle techniques, which I'm assuming you're pretty much doing and getting it into? And they also wanted to say thanks for the online tutorials and base meshes. So I just wanted to give you that shout out too from them.
What was the question?
They were asking for some wrinkle techniques.
We're going to go to that in a second. I'm just adding some variations in there with the standard brush. And again, I'm just adding some breakups to the overall shape, just so we can get that spec break and having some more information in there than just like a base, kind of like a base mesh. Instead of just going from here and adding a lot of alphas and wrinkles and stuff, it's good to have a good secondary breakup to your shape, so you're just gonna react better with the lighting.
Right here in the front row, question for you from the floor.
Yep.
So his fangs are very tight, like the bottom and top fangs. Are they like separate polygroups? How are you handling how close those meshes are together, the teeth?
This guy?
The teeth.
Oh, the teeth?
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to do actually. I'm just using the move brush when I'm blocking, and I'm just like pushing and pulling teeth like this. And then using dam standard, I'm just carving in the kind of like the shape of the teeth. It's kind of like that. So that's basically what I'm doing here. I'm still very messy, but I can, yeah, if this was for a more important project, I would probably just mask this and split as a different subtool so I can have more control over these edges right there. But I don't think we're gonna really see that in the render. And by using the inflate, I can come here and just working on those seams and make them go in a little bit more. And the topology is still very low res. So I'm not going crazy with the poly count. When I subdivide it again, everything's gonna fall into place kind of, and I'm just gonna start refining whatever is there.
Ricard's actually asking something about the product, Wacom. Do you feel sculpting with a Cintiq compared to a pen and tablet? Which one do you prefer?
I've worked with the tablet for, I don't know, 5, 6 years. And I've always preferred the tablet from the Cintiq. But yeah, when I started working with the Cintiq, I kind of just got used to it. And now I prefer the Cintiq. But it's a hard one to say. I think they're both the same kind of. It's just, I don't know, I feel more professional with the Cintiq.
It's the Ferrari of the tablets.
Yeah, I've always watched those guys using the Cintiq, and I was like, yeah.
What size do you have, the 22 or the 24?
I have the 22 HD.
Do you have it on an arm so you can do the whole swivel?
No, I'm working on that.
Yeah. It's nice.
Yeah. Right.
You got to upgrade. It's like a car for us. That's our car for artists.
Such a jerk talking to me. So yeah, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. You can see I'm just adding, with the clay brush, adding a lot of variation to the shape right there. I'm just going to start texturing in a bit. And again, on my work, you're going to see probably, if you start looking at some of my works, it's just a big balance between texturing and sculpting detail. So I like to do a lot of the texturing part, a lot of details on the texturing. So I use a lot of photo references and images to kind of bring some of the detail to the piece. Especially on the Raptor, you can see the model is very clean and it's almost no alpha or small pore detail, but the texture just make it, everything goes to place.
Oh, front row right here again for you, Raph.
In this phase, do you use photo references too to just like sculpt details from bugs or animals, or is this all from your head?
If it's something more with more time and more important, yeah, I'll always use reference and photo references for pretty much everything, especially if it's something professional or at work. Reference has to be like, it needs to be the explanation why you're doing something so you can get something approved. But if it's something personal, yeah, I just go with my my gut and what I have in my mind at the point. And that's why usually, even if it's something that's going to take more time, I try to push myself and gather some reference and use a lot of things that are going to help me improve and help me improve my mental library. Because right now what I'm doing this, I'm just using whatever I've done before. It's nothing, I'm not pushing myself to be better or to create something new in my head. So this is kind of more like an exercise. But if I want to improve and want to learn something new, yeah, references, and I always try to do something different that I've done before. Yeah.
I love that you're calling it an exercise and only this much time. I can't do that in 4 hours. I was doing it in 20 minutes.
Because you're not exercising enough.
There you go. Dang it, you're right. You're so right about that. Oh, wait, here's a question for you from Fran. Do you ZRemesh or do some kind of retopology for your concepts so that if you need it for posing or anything else, or do you just stick with what you have?
I ZRemesh pretty much every time I'm working on something, so I can like Dominic showed on earlier today, it's just a lot easier to pose it and to have more control over what you're doing. Even though UVs inside of ZBrush, if you have a Z-remeshed mesh, you can easily create an UV and texture in Photoshop, like I did on the Raptor piece. So yeah, I always have a Z-remesh. I always use Z-remesh for my pieces.
And for those that aren't available, don't know the Raptor piece he's talking about, Tomas will put it up on Twitter so everyone can see that image.
All right, I'm gonna subdivide it one more time and I'm gonna start finishing this.
I can't keep up with it. I'm getting a workout. Here you go, front row.
When you have a Dynamesh all detailed out with all the wrinkles and all the fine details, and then you want to go to Z-remesh, what method do you use to prevent the Z-remesher from softening all the fine wrinkles and details you just spent hours putting in, and then you Z-remesh, and they all just kind of flow out, and you lose a lot of fine detail? Is there a trick to that?
Yeah, you can, and Dominic showed this earlier, you can project whatever you had right here. You can project, you can project your high res into your new mesh. And usually you got some issues in like very tight areas, so you probably like inside the mouth, you're gonna have to clean up a couple things, but overall you can maintain pretty much everything. Yeah, project all.
Back here again in the front row.
What sensitivity settings do you have for your pen? Are you using any sort of like pen sensitive pressure to get your for your clay tubes?
No, I just a default one, but usually on my clay tubes, I like to just blur the alpha a little bit, like with the radial fade, so we get more, like a little bit more softened edges. You can see it just creates a nice, instead of being that hard thing like this. Again, it's just different approaches for the same thing, kind of. But yeah, I use the default intensity and for the tablet. All right, so I'm just adding some breakups over there. Just gonna catch some speck on that area. Let's see.
Here's a good question for you. Amag's asking, when did you start working in 3D, and do you have any tips for young high school artists to get into studios or a production?
Yeah, I'm from Brazil. I started probably 9 years ago working for advertising and movies in Brazil, and then I moved to Canada 3 years ago to work at BioWare. And yeah, and then 2 years ago I moved to LA to work at Sony, and right now I'm working at Sony Santa Monica. But there's a lot of different ways that you can get into this industry, but the most important thing is just a portfolio and probably connections. So that's why this it's an amazing thing to do, so people can make those connections. But yeah, your portfolio is still the most important thing, especially if you're from outside of LA or Canada. It's very hard to get into this industry, but once you're in, it's very rewarding and it's just a lot of options, and it's a very good place to be at.
You do other things too, right? You sculpt in some clay and
Yes.
other things as well, right?
Yeah, I started at the same time with like traditional sculpting and ZBrush. And those both things always work together for me. I've learned so much with the traditional sculpting and that I can apply to my work. And I still do a lot of sculpting at work. So yeah, I'm kind of doing both things at the same time. And I've always told my students to, if you have the chance, just go ahead and do traditional at the same time, because you learn so much stuff just having a piece of clay. And because in ZBrush you can pretty much change proportions whenever you feel like it, and in clay you gotta be more careful and study more the overall feel and proportions, and so yeah, it adds so much to your background. So yeah, I do both things.
I have to ask this question because you and I talked about this on the phone, actually. Abdul is asking, how do you sculpt hair in models, and what is the process, and how do you do for your details?
Yeah, so hair, it's kind of those things that you just have to look a lot of references and try to identify the flow of the hair. And I'm going to show you how I do it. It's pretty simple, actually. So I use a lot of just mainly standard brush with a lazy mouse, kind of. So trying to get imagine this guy would have curly hair. So I'm just trying to get the overall feel, and usually I'm start building up from the bottom to the top. So you can, depend on the hair, but you can do the standard brush like this and trying to get the overall flow. And then once you got everything kind of blocked up, you can go with the clay tubes also and start building from the bottom. The clay, I think, is the trick to get it to the overlay properly. So if I'm sculpting from the bottom like this, and always building up the layers. So let's see. And again, references and a lot of very old school and like classic sculptures and trying to study what they do. So once I'm happy with the overall flow and shape of the hair, I go back there. And that's why I like to have all my subdivisions on there. I can go lower and just smooth everything. And then, so I go back now with the standard brush, or I can do this with the standard or with the damp standard. Usually it's a mix between those two. I can come here with a very low intensity and actually get the hair, the actual hair in there. And it's a very demanding time-wise, but there's no real shortcut to. I just saw that, I think Disney is creating a scan that can scan the hair. I saw this yesterday and just, yeah, that'll be very helpful actually. And then I can come back with the damp standard with a proper lazy mouse radius and just go and start refining those in-betweens and adding more shape. Adding that breakup in between those. And then once I'm happy, I just go and smooth everything. And then I'll go back and do it again and again until I'm satisfied with the end result. Right.
It's a sophisticated monster.
I'm going to start applying some alphas and I'm just going to apply like an overall pore detail to this guy. And I got this pore alpha map with a drag rag brush stroke. And I'm just going to drag and drop some of those pore details in this guy with a very low intensity. And again, I'm just going to blur this alpha a little bit. All right. Again, just so we have kind of a breakup on the spec. We don't want it to be, unless it's something very shiny and like a hard surface or something like this, you don't want a lot of detail on the spec. But if it's a skin, if you got that noise in the skin, it's always helpful to achieve a skin shader, a nice skin shader. So
Here's another good one for you, Raph, since I know your process a little bit. Andre's asking, I would like to know what is a good point that you stop deciding to use symmetry in your sculpting process.
That's the very, very last step on something. Instead of, if it's a face, I start, I'd say after 20% of the face. After I'm happy with the overall proportions, I break the symmetry and start working without it. But if it's something like a creature or if I'm working on the body, I try to use it as much as I can. And even if the body is not going to be symmetrical, but the face will be, or the opposite, I just try to split those subtools and still maintain as much symmetry as I can. So I'm just using the clay brush to go there and adding some different details to the mesh, so it's not something the same everywhere, and I can easily do that with those same brushes that we just talked about. And again, something like this, I'll probably do without symmetry, but since we don't have a lot of time, I'll just probably just...
Here's another question right here in the middle from the floor.
Would you typically Z-remesh before this stage when you're going into all the textures?
Yes, the ZBrush will go even before we started on this. Like when I'm happy with the Dynamesh, I'll probably do ZBrush and then go from there. So using clay tubes now to break up to those teeth. Again, I think the symmetry is very important in the center of the image. Even if you're detailing or you're going to start texturing it, just make sure you turn off in the center of your model so it's not always the same. Cool. I think we're almost done with this. I have to start texturing, otherwise no time. Add some wrinkles in there. So for texturing, I'm just going to start texturing. So for texturing, I'm just using a lot of photo references, and then I do a lot of paint job using I'm going to show you, using the brushes in ZBrush, like a traditional sculpture, just kind of like an airbrush, and I can easily just use the standard brush and just changing the stroke to something like a color spray, for example. Well, first of all, I'm just going to paint this guy, let's say a green guy. So I start always with the dark colors, and then I'm just going to build up with the bright colors. So I'm just going to fill this guy with the green, and I'm going to pick a brighter green. And with the color spray, in a very low intensity, I can come here and start adding some variations to the brightness. And the color spray is going to give me a little bit of variation to the color also, not only the shape of the paintbrush. All right, I'm going to pick up more like a skin tone orange color to the mouth, and going into the face a little bit. It's very dark in there, but I hope you guys can see it. Just gonna make it, probably make it brighter in here, in the material. There you go. All right, so let's make a more saturated color. So I'm kind of painting kind of the skin tone. Same thing, and that's why it's very important to watch all the old school guys, the traditional guys, how they paint those masks, and use that as a reference to see how they treat the color and what they put some of the details in the color. The color that they use, that kind of stuff is very helpful, even though we're doing something digital. If we can bring some of that stuff back into our workflow, it's very cool. And some purple. And again, I think for a skin to look more believable. You gotta have some blues and purples in there. So that's why after I'm done with the more warm colors, I'm gonna start adding the cold colors in. So you can see just starting to break up that warm. Oops. And again, I'm just worrying about the face right now because we don't have a lot of time, but this is probably gonna be our final image. I'm gonna paint those teeth. Yeah, let me just say one thing. I'm just gonna import some of the textures that I brought so we can start texturing that guy. I can import it as an alpha or as an actual texture. I'm just gonna do texture mode right now. So if I import it right here, let's say this guy, this marble, I can bring it in as a spotlight. So add to spotlight, and it's gonna bring it in like this. So I can position this guy right here, and I can start painting those textures into the model. So let's say I want this right there. Just having the RGB on, I can start having those textures in there. And I'm using Shift-Z to hide it and unhide it. And if you only press Z, you can use the wheel. And you can change the opacity so I can see what's going on behind it. And keep painting. Kind of like this.
Got a question right there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Have you ever had the case where you want so much resolution that is more than 4K map, which, you know, about an 8 million model, it's a little bit less since it's pure poly paint, that you want some more detail than that? Do you have, ever had a case for that? And if you do, how do you solve that?
Just different UV sets from the same mesh, and you can have multiple UV sets on the same mesh inside of ZBrush. You can, if you have multiple UV sets, you can polygroup by UV groups, and then you can easily hide those individual objects based on your UV set and bake those textures to that UV set. So you can have as many UV sets as you want and as many polygroups as you want inside of ZBrush, if that answers. Or if I'm poly painting it instead of, yeah, you can easily also split your mesh into any place. If you want more detail in the face, for example, I can easily just mask the face and say split by mask, and then I'm gonna have two subtools with as many subdivisions as I can start splitting, and if I want to paint on the mesh. But most of the times I do some work in ZBrush as far as I can get, and then I also use Photoshop or Mari or other software to do that.
Here's a question from the Twitter audience. Ramsey's asking, what kind of works do you feel a modeler should have in their portfolio?
It really depends on what you want to do with your professional life, I think. If you want to work at Blizzard, just do whatever Blizzard is doing.
Or just contact Dominic quick.
Yeah, I know. If you want to work at, I don't know, BioWare, if you want to work at Mass Effect, you better have some hard surface stuff on your portfolio. Otherwise, they're not going to hire you. So just basically come up with a plan and see where you want to work and what you like to do, and go from there. At the beginning, I was doing pretty much everything, a little bit of everything. And I learned a lot from it, but it just takes a lot more time than if you just focus on what you want to do with your life.
There's a question here from the audience in the middle.
So working at Sony, I'm sure you're using a physically based shading model. This is really nice and well with an old forward shading model where it's more about diffuse. Do you use texturing wise what do you do for roughness maps or anything more complicated for the more modern engines and pipelines?
The thing is, well, at work, or if we're using physically based models, we have a team just working for that and creating this huge library. So we don't do a lot of specific work for shaders. So it's all masking? It's all masking, yeah.
What's your poly count at right now, Raph?
My poly count?
Yeah, what's the total polygon count of your mesh right now?
10.
There you go. Thank you. It was just a question, I figured. From Twitter.
Oh, we don't have a lot of time.
You got about
Okay,
10.
so
You got about 10 minutes left, just so you know.
I'm just gonna use what I can do here. I can use my poly paint to mask it. So if I mask by color and by intensity, I'm gonna have some information of my poly paint on my mask that I can use it for kind of bump up some of those details. So for example, in here, I can go from like using an inflate and kind of inflate a little bit of those details. So you can see right there, and just hide the mask. So you can see I'm going to start having a lot of information from my texturing in my actual high-res sculpt, and that's good, especially in faces that you want to keep your wrinkles in the same place as your textures for the wrinkles, for example. So usually if I'm sculpting a face, I'll probably texture it before I start detailing it, if that's for like a pipeline inside of a studio, for example. Because this way, if I'm using a lot of photo reference for my textures, all my detail is going to match my actual final textures. So I can do that, and I'm going to start rendering this guy. So if I'm just going to set up a camera, a very pretty angle, so kind of like this. So I'm just going to store a Z-Plane camera right here. And there's just a couple of things you have to keep in mind for shadows and lights overall. And here on the render settings, you have BPR shadow. And basically, if I do a render now, and it's really dark in there, but if I render this, you're going to see that the shadows are very hard and very harsh. So the angle actually controls that. If I put like 30 at an angle, you're going to see it's going to soften those shadows a little bit. And yeah, if your angle, if you have a big value on an angle, you have to kind of increase your ray samples, so you just get more resolution in those shadows, and it's going to slow down a little bit the render. I'm just going to keep it like this because we want it to be fast at this time. So every time you press render or shift R, you're going to create all those render passes, which is awesome from ZBrush. And you can just export it by clicking on shader. And I'm just going to export this real quick. So we have ZDepth, shadow pass, and a mask. And I can also do occlusion and a subsurface just by turning on those options. I'm not changing anything at this point. So you can see you can see my light right here in the corner. The first render that I did was a little more like a front light. And I like to do one very frontal like this. And this is going to take a little bit more time because of the ambient occlusion and the SSS. But again, it's nothing compared to.
It's a great time for a question.
Yes.
Okay, right next to me right here, we got a question.
Thank you. When you were using the projection box, is there a time that you use the RGB and the Z-Add or Z-Sub at the same time when you are painting and giving details?
I almost never use those both at the same time. If I'm painting, I'm painting. If I'm sculpting, I'm sculpting. Maybe if I'm doing like hair or if I'm making something more specific, I use it both at the same time, but I prefer to paint, and then if I wanted to add some of those, the paint job into the mesh, I just mask by whatever I painted and inflate or do some other things. So now that I just did the ambient occlusion and the SSS, I can just turn them off because they are going to be the same for every single render. So I'm just going to do one side view like this. And every time I'm doing those extra ones now, I'm only exporting the shaded version. I'm not exporting all those passes again. So I'm just going to put 2. I'm just going to do one for the other side. And again, now that ZBrush is releasing with the key shot, and a lot of the key shot options is awesome. I'm sure I'm going to see a lot of cool stuff. But ZBrush still have an awesome render tools that we can use. And one thing about that we have to be careful is just if you want to work as a character artist, your model needs to be 100%, and that's why you have to present. That's your final. I mean, if you work as a concept artist or as a character 3D concept, you don't have to worry too much about that. Your final image is going to be very important for it. But if you want to work as a character artist in a game studio, your portfolio needs to have basically characters on it, not beautiful lightings and that kind of stuff. So ZBrush still has amazing tools to actually show your work. So you just got to keep an. That's why I'm showing you guys this, and that's basically what I use for almost all my personal projects. So if you click on the light, it's actually bringing the light back, and if you click it again, it's just coming to the front. Oh, my Cintiq. Oh, there you go. So now I can do backlights. I'm just going to do one top backlight. And again, this is very important if you have references, because you can probably recreate the image that you like or a photo that you like. But right now, I'm just going to do the standard, the first thing that you learn when you're lighting is just basically 3-point lights, backlights, red, blue, that basic stuff. So you can see I'm using the basic material for all the passes, and I like to use reflected map to create a spec. And I'm just going to do one because we don't have time. And this is going to create my specular map. I'm just going to export that and quickly to Photoshop. So I'm just copy and paste everything into one image. All right. And then if we organize this, so we have all the lights. And by doing this, you saw that I did like both side lights, and I can have more control about the final image like that. So I have ambient occlusion, Z-depth, mask. Let me just take this to the top. SSS, shadow pass, backlight, 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 the side light, other side light, and then our main light right here. I don't know what happened with my spec pass. Just gonna open that. There you go. Just gonna put that at the top. There you go. So basically, usually you can mix these lights. Let's come closer. And control your light like this with the opacity if you want to. Or you can use it as a screen mode and have it just add it to the main light. So I'm just going to use as a normal, and I'm going to blend it in just a little bit so we get the nice blend between all the lights and create that global illuminational feel that we got from other softwares. And then we bring this backlight, this top light, I'm just going to use it as a screen mode, and you can see I can change the intensity, I can change the levels, and it's good to keep that very organized, but again, we don't have time. I'm just going to bump that guy. And then we'll bring in the second backlight, and I'm just going to crank those values up. And again, I can change the color, and that's why I keep everything very simple, because I can do pretty much everything into Photoshop. This is not working. All right, I can change the color in here. If you want like a blue color, like this. All right, your second spec or second backlight, or third backlight actually. That side. Oh, why is this not working? Shortcuts. Let's make it blue. And a screen mode, I'm just going to add that backlight in. And I can crank up those values. And then that's when everything starts to fall into place. We got the shadow as a multiply. There you go. And we got the SSS. And the way you can use these, we can change those values just to get some of the edges. And we can colorize like this. And we can apply as a screen mode to the edges. Like that. And then we got Z-depth, we got ambient occlusion, and we can tint the ambient occlusion a little bit too. So you get that skin feel and more purple-ish. As a multiply. Wait, what? Oh, it's got the Z-depth on it. All right. It's very dark in the screen, but. And then we got the spec that we can, again, change those values as we want and use it as a screen mode, and all the spec is coming. And then we can mask it, paint that mask in. Like that. Especially in the eyes, we can do something for the eyes. And then we can grab this mask right here and then put everything into a group and use it as a mask. Space that guy in. There you go. And if you want to paint a background, oops. I have a Cintiq. Why am I using the mouse? There you go. And then, since we have everything in layers and everything is working in additive and screen, I can go back there and actually tweak those lights and add it more to the side. Or if I want to bring it back to the other side, everything is right there. And if I want to create more lights and add it on top, I can always go back there and add more stuff to it. And that's time.
That's it. Everyone, Raphael Grassetti.